Welcome to the Landmark Theater's Q&A podcast. In this podcast, you will hear a discussion with director Morgan Neville from the film Best of Enemies, moderated by Landmark Theater's president Ted Mundorff, recorded at the Landmark West LA.
So I want to start asking a couple questions about especially Gore Vidal. And one of the things that I was interested in is when Buckley had been doing a TV show, and Gore Vidal was an author. So how did ABC figure out that he could be a TV personality?
Well, Gore was actually a TV personality long before Buckley was.
Is that right?
Yeah. So Gore had started, Gore was a screenwriter, a playwright, a novelist, all in the 1950s, wrote a lot of teleplays, and started appearing on shows like, What's My Line in the early 60s. And we get into it just a little bit, but in 1962, Gore goes on the Jack Parr show and mocks Buckley. Buckley writes a scathing memo to Jack Parr demanding equal time. And that, in a way, was Buckley's introduction to the national TV stage. So in a way, Vidal was responsible for Buckley's introduction to national TV. And then Buckley parlayed his 1965 mayoral campaign in New York into a TV show starting in '66, firing line that runs for 33 years. Both of them, you just have to understand, both of them understood television completely, in a way that intellectuals just didn't. Both of them, Vidal understood theater in such a way, and Buckley was such a master debater, and you understand that debate is essentially theater. So both of them did not look down their nose at television. In a way, it was called the boob tube at the time. Intellectuals at the time thought it was beneath them to appear on it. But they understood it was the perfect way to build a movement or to sell books, or to whatever your agenda was. Television was actually an incredibly effective format.
Well, and now it may be back to that. So I understand you interviewed Gore for this. Yeah. How'd that go? What happened?
Well, not well. So first off, my first job out of college was working as Gore's fact checker. At The Nation magazine, I was assigned to work with him, and it was my job to call him. This is before the internet. It was my job to call him on the phone in Revello and tell him he'd gotten very small facts slightly wrong. And then I'd pull the receiver away from my ear as he screamed at me. And I had immense respect for Gore. He had an incredible mind. But he didn't like to be challenged, if that's not already apparent. And certainly by fact checkers. So fast forward all these years later, we interviewed him. We started this film in 2010. We started with a handful of interviews. We did Christopher Hitchens in May 2010, about 2 weeks before he was diagnosed with cancer. We did Dick Cavett, Frank Rich, and James Wolcott then. And then we did Gore. And of course, Gore agreed because you don't turn down sex or appearing on television. And we went up to his house in the Hollywood Hills on Outlook Drive, and he'd kept this house since the early 60s. And they let us in. We sat up in his living room. His kind of manservant brought him in a wheelchair. And he was, this is about a year and a half before he died. And he was not in great shape. But so he came into the room, and he wouldn't make eye contact with any of us. I mean, needless to say, this is an incredibly intimidating situation to be in, and Gore could be, incredibly intimidating as an interviewee. And somebody on the crew, by way of making polite conversation, said, my grandfather served in the Aleutian Islands when you did in World War II, and he said he could never keep warm throughout the entire war. And Gore looked up for the first time and suddenly locked eyes with all of us, with like lightning bolts coming out, and said, I had my rage to keep me warm. And that's how we began our 3-hour interview with Gore, during which he accused us of being Buckleyites. He attacked us, berated us. I mean, essentially, he disagreed with the premise of our film, being, namely, that he and Buckley should ever be in the same sentence. The idea that he and Buckley were in any way comparable was completely foreign to him, because Buckley was beneath his contempt, and he just couldn't get over it. And there are many reasons we decided not to use the interview. Gore had already gotten the last word in his scathing obituary, and we felt like without Buckley having a chance to speak, it just felt so imbalanced. But the capper to that story was, as we were leaving his house that day, his servant came back and said, "Mr. Vidal would like to have cocktails with you. Would you like to have a drink?" And we badly needed a drink at that point. So we were led upstairs, and we thought we were going to be led into a den or a salon or something. And he instead leads us back into Gore's bedroom. And Gore's already back in bed at this point. And Gore says, "Boys, sit down." And we look around the room, and there are no chairs in the room. So we all sit on Gore's bed while his servant brings in cocktails on a tray. And we sat around and had a lovely conversation with Gore for about an hour and a half. And I think he really understood where we were coming from. And it was great. However, if we had turned up at the camera again, I think we would have gotten the exact same interview.
Can you use any of it in the DVD?
It's so painful for me to watch, actually. We've been talking about it, but God, he wouldn't even speak in complete sentences. It was tough.
Wow. So do you think anyone at ABC should have credit for actually putting this together? Because it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. We interviewed many, many people who aren't in the film. The cutting room floor is incredible. We interviewed Noam Chomsky and Bob Shearer and another one of Buckley's brothers, James Buckley, who was a senator from the state of New York, and Gore. But one other person we interviewed was the director of these debates, who has Alzheimer's and was not in great shape, Wally Pfister Sr. And it turns out that Wally Pfister Jr., as you may know, is one of the top cinematographers in Hollywood. And his dad had been the director at ABC News in the 1960s, and he was the one that came up with the idea internally of doing these debates. And it's interesting, we just optioned the documentary to Aaron Sorkin to make it into a feature film. Not that this isn't a feature film, but because it is. This is the film, to the Hollywood version of the film. And when I told him this, he said, "Oh my God," because Wally Pfister shot Social Network. And he said, "I was thinking Wally Pfister would be the perfect person." I love the idea of Wally Pfister doing a film based on what his dad had done too. I think that would be kind of amazing. Full circle.
Wow. I don't think there's anyone in Hollywood could do Buckley and Gore as well as Buckley and Gore.
No.
Right?
No, they were incredibly good at playing themselves on television. And we've talked about it. It's like a fun game to play.
So I read somewhere where you had originally seen some footage at a museum, or someone had seen footage of the debates at a museum. Where did you get the rest of the footage? How'd that come about?
Yeah, it wasn't a museum. It was there was a bootleg floating around that actually was a copy of that same VHS tape that Gore had in Ravello, that he got from a cousin who had badgered ABC to get it, and there was this long kind of history of this tape making its way around.
The Sunset Boulevard tape.
It was the Sunset Boulevard tape. And we got it, 5 years ago. And it wasn't all the debates, but instantly we knew we wanted to make a film out of it. But we didn't know. The thing was, we saw this drama, we saw these characters. What we didn't know the ABC story. We didn't understand the full context. And kind of intrinsically in the material, you feel like this says a lot about what intellectuals could do on TV then and how things have changed. But we didn't understand how all those things were connected. And what was amazing was it was one of these rare experiences on a film where we were doing primary research, and the deeper we got into it, the better it got. All these connections that we just said, "Oh my God, can you believe this is actually," we didn't have an agenda going into it. Our only agenda was, let's not make a film about the arguments. Let's just make a film about how we argue. That was kind of our big idea in the beginning. Let's stand back and at least have a discussion about civil discourse. And but it was one of those great subjects. I mean, when you spend 5 years on a film, you want a subject that you love, that you're not going to get sick of. And this was like a bottomlessly interesting subject.
Well, I've seen the film twice, and I saw it once initially in Sundance, and then preparing for this, I saw it again. And so I actually saw the film almost as two different films. So if you guys want to come back again, we're going to show Myra Breckenridge right after this, followed by Caligula. But tomorrow morning we'll start Best of Enemies again. But I first saw it as a historical film. And when I watched it again, the second time, I saw it as a political film. I mean, it was the primary. So it really is fun watching this twice.
To me, it's a cultural film.
Of course.
Yeah. You know, because to me, it's not about politics and it's not about history. To me, it's about the culture of politics and it's about media. I mean, that's the thing I really zero in on. Because when you get into I mean, as much as I love politics and I came out of politics, I'm a cultural filmmaker, and that's the thing I realized I gravitate towards. And I'm much more interested in the way the conversations take place than in trying to relive or refight those battles. And, you know, yes, I love history, but the thing was this never, I mean, the hard part about making this film was that when we saw this film, we said, I can't believe this footage is as relevant as to today as it seems. I mean, the culture battles, the talking about sexuality and religion and race and income inequality and all of these things we saw, we said this is exactly today. And then when we took it out to get the film made and tried to raise money, the comment we got over and over was, does anybody care? Is this relevant at all? And we kept saying, yes, it is. Yes, it is. And nobody believed us. So, cut to 5 years later, really the most rewarding thing about making the film now is the most common comment I get is, I can't believe how relevant the film is. Because we didn't want to make a film as a history piece or a nostalgia piece. I'm not interested in that. You know, I wanted to make a film about today that says something that we can actually relate to about, gee, there was a time when we could actually at least talk with people we didn't agree with and possibly change minds and decide on, you know, what civil discourse can be in a country like ours.
Well, I mean, I think that the statement earlier in the film is that 80% of the public watch the Republican convention. I mean, that doesn't even happen today. So, I mean, that, you talk about a shift. I mean, we can barely get 20% to the polls. So, to your point, it really is a change. Yet you look at the Congress today, sure, it hasn't changed, has it? Or it's just gotten worse.
No, I mean, there's kind of an inherent, I mean, really the crux of the takeaway of the film is a double-edged sword, which is on the one hand, you've got this democratization of media, which is in many ways great. It gives many people voices. It gives people in Tahrir Square a voice. It gives minorities voices. It gives anybody a voice. And it's hard to pine for the days when you have a group of elite white males in towers of Manhattan telling you that's the way it is. At the same time, the democratization of media has also led to the democratization of truth. And what that means is that we don't actually have to listen to people. We don't even have to, you know, the Daniel Patrick Moynihan quote that, you know, you can have your own facts, but you can have your own opinions, but you can't have your own facts. Well, today people have their own facts. You know, today people never have to hear a fact they don't already believe. When you search Google, it knows what your political preferences are, and it shows you articles based on what it thinks you want to hear. I mean, it's these kind of echo chambers that TV is part of, but the internet is part of, that we're not even thinking about, that really is dangerous to me, because we aren't having a conversation with each other, because we don't even see the same picture. And I think that's what I was most concerned about and that I wanted to get back to.
How did you get the rights to all the ABC footage? It was overwhelming to see how much footage you had.
So the thing was, when we started the film, like I said, we didn't know ABC was a major player, but we made a deal with ABC from the beginning. You know, we put an option down, we made a deal, a tiered deal on how much footage we used and all this stuff. Because having done this, having made many documentaries, I know if you don't have the rights, you're screwed. So we had nailed that down in the beginning. as the film became more and more about ABC, the people we were dealing with at ABC got more and more nervous, to the point where they were not sleeping. And we had been talking to people from the top to the bottom of the company, and we finally finished a cut of the film, and we showed it to the head of business affairs at ABC News. And we got an email back saying, this is a film of quality. We're a news organization. We don't believe in censorship. You can use everything. And no, we paid for it.
Freedom has a price.
Free, though they were, because they were accommodating. But I have to say, having done many, many documentaries and dealt with many news organizations, that is a very rare sentiment. I've had many news organizations censor all kinds of things for all kinds of reasons. And even when we had a screening in Washington, D.C., and Sam Donaldson came, and he loved his hair. So everybody was happy. So how do we decide what to use from the debates? We spent a long time working on that. So they did 10 debates, roughly 15 minutes a night, so they're roughly 2.5 hours of raw debates. Much of it is on YouTube, not all of it's on YouTube. And, the ratio of, say, ad hominem discussions and attacks to substance in the film is maybe 75-25. I would say in the raw debates, it's maybe 65 ad hominem attacks, 35 content. It's not radically different. We didn't radically alter the balance between content and personal discussion. And obviously a lot of the stuff we cut out was stuff that was very specific to 1968, talking about McGovern or the party platform of that year. So really the bigger issues were what was interesting to us. But the thing I think that's really important is that, again, talking about the idea of identity politics, in 1968, who you were became a political position. If you were a homosexual like Gore Vidal or a strict Vatican I Catholic like William F. Buckley, to each of them, those were political positions. Today, we all know that. We know what your race or sexuality or philosophy is a political position. But in 1968, that blurring of the personal and the political was just really happening. And so I think they felt that personal attacks in that way were justified because they were political attacks, that Buckley's Catholicism was a political stand and Gore's sexuality was a political stand. Yeah, I mean, Gore had an incredible facility for facts and memory. And one thing we mentioned in the film is when we were doing the film, I went through Gore's papers at Harvard, where they're now housed, and found the voluminous files labeled Buckley, which included thousands of pages of depositions from lawsuits and debates. And then I found the files from the 68 debates, including all the opposition research he had done on the National Review and on Buckley, and then found those pages of scripted insults he had at the ready to go. So Gore was very interested in facts, but never won. I mean, what's interesting is, in a way, they did play a version of themselves on television. I think Gore was much more who he was on camera and off. I mean, he comes off as a cold person, and Gore over and over would make comments about that are almost funny, things like, it's not that I must succeed, it's that my friends must fail. Or if you look underneath my cold, hard exterior, you'll find ice water underneath in my veins. And it sounds like shtick, but everybody who knew Gore said, no, that's actually exactly who he was. And he would say that, I'm not making this up, this is who I am. Buckley, off camera, didn't like to talk about politics. He liked to talk about art and history. His wife, Pat Buckley, who ran the original Met Ball, had a large circle of friends, liberal friends and gay friends. At one point, Buckley said, if there are 10,000 gay men in New York, I know 9,000 of them. And so in a way, he was not quite the person he played on TV. And Buckley was somebody who changed his mind many times. He was first pro-segregation, then anti-segregation. He was for the first Gulf War, then came out against the second Gulf War. He was somebody who's obviously racked with regret about these events. And I just don't have any sense that Gore ever regretted a single move he made.
Congratulations, very well done film.
Thank you.
My question is, how did you choose Kelsey Grammer and John Lithgow? I thought those were very good choices, but if there was anyone else you had in mind or anyone else read?
I mean, we thought about so many different ideas because we knew we had to get these voices in there. I mean, we literally brainstormed everything from having children to having women to having Jon Stewart and Bill O'Reilly. I mean, we were kicking around all kinds of ideas. And those are all more stunty ideas. But I think once we thought about Kelsey Grammer, who's a noted conservative, and John Lithgow, a noted liberal, we thought, well, that could work. And we recorded Lithgow first, and it just reminded us instantly, like, oh, that's what happens if you have amazing actors read words. They're really good at it. Thank God we didn't do anything else. Because you instantly forget who they are and get into the reading of what they're saying. So I'd like to take credit, but I kind of feel like it was a happy accident.
I can understand Buckley's response to the debate and his fixation on it and his upset over it, but I don't understand Gore. Mm-hmm. I mean, he won. Why was he so obsessed about this whole thing? Do you have any idea?
I mean, he was obsessed about it. Why was Gore obsessed about it? Because it was, to him, it was a high watermark in his public life. It was something where he had, vanquished evil on the national stage. And, Gore had a sizable ego. And both of them were asked about it throughout the rest of their lives on national TV and interviews over and over. Every time Buckley was asked about it, he demurred. He said, I've said everything I have to say about it. I'm not going to say anything else. Every time Vidal was asked about it, he took it as the perfect opportunity to lob another grenade at Buckley. To the very end, to the obituary he wrote. I mean, to him, and I have to say, Matt Tiernauer, who says at the end of the film, Vidal was somebody who lived to fight. And again, I actually feel like we could do a whole series of documentaries of Vidal and his enemies. This is the first. We could do Vidal and Mailer, Vidal and Capote. I mean, he had any number of these kind of deep intellectual feuds going on. And those, in a way, were what gave him fuel because he was, by his very nature, somebody who loved to live in opposition. Did Gore have healthy relationships? Well, he had a partner, Howard, who he was with for 45, 50 years, who passed away in the early 2000s. And that's when Gore moved back. Actually moved back with Howard here. He said what he labeled his Cedar Sinai years, coming back to Los Angeles. And Howard died not long after they moved back. And they were great. Howard was, by all accounts, a charming man and partner. However, curiously, Gore said that they never slept together. So I don't know what that means. Yeah. Do I like Gore? Yeah, I mean, let me put it this way. I mean, I have immense respect for Gore. The shocking thing for me making the film as a liberal is I think I would actually rather have dinner with Buckley. Just, in a way, I think Gore, if you were a guest at Gore's dinner table, I think he could be the most charming person. And if he saw you as an equal, because he didn't see people as superior, but if he saw you as an equal, which is a very small group, he could be utterly charming. And he was an incredible mind. But I think Buckley was the more generous person. Am I hopeful? I'm kind of by nature a pessimist. So, but I wouldn't be making these films if I didn't want to do something about it. I think they themselves say, at the time, they realized that television is not the medium for them. that television demands ratings. Another word for ratings is lowest common denominator, and it's had this corrosive effect on our politics and on our media. There's a kind of strand of anti-intellectualism in America that's tough, and I see our politicians trying to be the guy you want to have a beer with, rather than somebody you look up to and are inspired by their intelligence and knowledge. To me, I've made a couple of films trying to get at the fact of what can we agree about as a country. As somebody who came out of kind of left-wing media, I'm now kind of trying to look at issues that we can at least agree upon from the left and the right, because I don't think there's much to be gained with arguing with yourself when the right argues with the right or the left argues with the left. And we've talked about, I would love for some things to come out of this film. We've talked about staging some debates and about trying to maybe going into the election to try and actually do some kind of real national Vidal-Buckley type debates with figures. The hard part is they're big shoes to fill, so who do you get to play these roles, and what's interesting is Vidal and Buckley aren't in any way shills for the Democratic or Republican Party. They were outsiders, and they were unpredictable because they believed in their own ideas. They didn't believe in whatever the party was telling them to believe. So they disagreed with their base at times. And that unpredictability is incredibly interesting to watch. And so much of what I see on pundit TV today, you don't even need the volume on. You know what people are going to say. So, who are the people who are going to fill those shoes? Christopher Hitchens would have been one of them if he was around. I think people like Andrew Sullivan get into that realm. Maybe a Frank Rich. I don't know. And on the right, what's interesting about what's happened to the right is, Buckley, and we forget this, but Buckley basically started as an insurgent in the right wing, starting the National Review in '55, and actually led a purge not only against the moderate Republicans back when that wasn't an oxymoron, the kind of Rockefeller Republicans, but also purged the party of the John Birch Society, what he called the anti-Semites and the kooks. And he wanted to make the party respectable enough that his form of conservatism could become mainstream, which it did with the election of Reagan. What happened was he lived long enough to see the kooks, as it were, coming home to roost. And I think that in a way was sad.
Can you project, or do you see a potential forum for this common dialogue or discussion that was lost with this fracturing that occurred?
And it's interesting. We've been talking to Participant Media, one of our partners, who have an interest in trying to build something around the film. We've talked to people like the Miller Center at the University of Virginia and everybody from the 92nd Street Y on through. There are organizations that I think are interested. How to build something out of that, I think, is something we're going to try and do over time. The question is, how do we build something that people want to see? What's so unique is it's not just having the smart people to talk, but the smart people to talk who understand how to talk, too. They're, in a way, with the loss of this kind of hothouse of what could be on television, you have intellectuals and smart people who just haven't had the time to develop those public voices in the same way. So, like I said, it's more about who are the people to fill those shoes. But we've been talking about it, and maybe with some luck we'll do it.
I want to ask you, I get to ask the last question. What's up next?
Next. I have two films, radically different. One I'm doing with Participant, is about Yo-Yo Ma and his Silk Road project, and about how he's tried to change the world with music, which is a great film. It's called The Music of Strangers, and it's going to be coming out soon. And the other film is about Keith Richards, who's a guitarist in a band.
Back to the music, huh? I would like to thank participant, which is mentioned earlier tonight, for putting films out like this and helping films along, and they're a great organization. And I'd like to thank Magnolia Pictures, our sister company, for distributing this. And now the deal is, and those of you who've been here before, you have to go out and tell 4 people to see this film, because it's the only way we continue to bring folks in and continue to show great movies like this. And thank you very much for spending time with us tonight.
Thank you so much. Thank you.